Hey everybody, good morning. How y'all feeling? Y'all fed, coffee, caffeinated, all that? It is an absolute joy to be here with you this morning, and a joy to have you here for NCL and for a real conversation about where we are and where we're going, and frankly having this conversation with all of you, all of our partners, thought leaders, policymakers, those who are on the ground in the fight every single day, those who are part of affected populations. This fight is urgent, and it creates, as we see as the theme of the entire conference, a real possibility of now. And understanding that this conversation has to take place now, and it has to be real, it has to be clear, it has to be honest, and it has to be thorough. But the truth is that when we're looking around this room, every single one of you have made a choice. You could be elsewhere, you could be a lot of other places, but to say I'm going to spend an early part of February, an entire day talking about the issue of poverty is powerful, and it's very telling. It's telling because we actually are in a space where issues that are going to impact not just us right now, but generations are at stake. Conversations around things like the census, which is not just going to have an impact on who gets counted next year, but frankly, how we are going to find and fund and fairly allocate resources for an entire generation. And making sure that when we're looking at our census count for this next round, that we have the most fair and equitable and representative census. Making sure that we're actually having conversations as we're going to election years about issues like poverty. And knowing that even though it might not be politically expedient, poverty, dealing with poverty, child poverty, generational poverty, entrenched poverty, are things that we must make sure are at the forefront of all of our conversations. Now, some of the things that we have seen in recent times actually show that there has been some progress made on this issue. Now, we know the poverty rate has slightly lowered, and that now hovering around, from New York City alone, around 20% of the population is now living in poverty. Here's the reality, though. It's not only that we shouldn't be satisfied with that number. It's also that the story of that number isn't true. It's also that the story of that number isn't accurate. As you'll hear a little later on from our Chief of Grand Strategy, Sarah Altmans, and the Columbia University team, our poverty tracker shows that when you actually dig into the numbers and disaggregate the numbers, you see just how problematic the problem of poverty is, both in New York City, but also around the country. The reality is that 50% of all New Yorkers over the past 4 years have been in poverty at least a year. Think about that, 50%, half. You know, we all just came off holiday breaks and we all just came off time with our families. Imagine your family, your cousins, brothers and sisters, aunties, uncles. By the way, for those who don't know what an auntie is, that's an aunt. Or aunt. Now imagine half of them cannot escape the scourge of poverty. Imagine half of them, no matter how hard they are trying, still have poverty as a distinct reality in their family and something that they can't escape. Particularly when you continue to dig into the data and you realize that even for the people who are able to escape poverty, over 50% will be back in poverty within 2 years. Poverty is sticky. Poverty is unforgiving. The point of today, the point of all of our work, is to make sure that we're not having a conversation about poverty that's hovering around this idea that we're trying to make poverty easier on people, or make poverty more tolerable, less painful. The reality of today, the possibility of now, the reality that we see in our existence right now is we are in the wealthiest country at the wealthiest time in the world history, and it is absolutely unacceptable that we have so many people who could not tell you that. The reality is, it is unforgivable and inexcusable and inhumane that we still have levers and policies and frameworks that are both putting people and keeping people in poverty. And the reality is that each and every one of us, all of us, with all of our organizations, with all of our individual might, don't just have an obligation to do something about it, we have an obligation to understand our own complicity in it. We have an obligation to know that the urgency is real and the urgency must be felt. So we, all of us, collectively in this group, in this room, whether you are a philanthropist, a policymaker, a business person, direct service provider, or someone who's actually directed by the work and impacted by the work, that there are a few things that we come to this work with. There's a few levels of humility that we must come to this work with. We come with a humility to understand that context matters and history matters. If we continue to dig into that data, we understand that while that number in New York City hovers around 50%, here's another reality about those numbers. If you're African American, if you're an African American New Yorker, that number is 59%. If you're Latinx, that number is 68%. We have to be able to understand the context and the history in which all of these realities show themselves. And understanding and having a context of the history of things like blockbusting and redlining is not simply because it's to play gotcha. It's not simply because we have to keep those things in mind because it sounds good. We have to keep those things in mind because they still have direct impacts on the way people are living right now. We have to keep those things in mind because we have to understand the intentionality in which our society was created, and the only way we're going to unpackage it is to actually attack this unpackaging with the same level of intentionality, of thoughtfulness. Except this time, we come with a lens of fairness and equity. We have to understand the importance of collaboration in all of our work. If I could ask you all a quick question. For how many of you, this is your first time at NCO? Good. For how many of y'all, this is not your first time at NCO? All right, the thing that I ask is this. For those who raised their hand the first time, seek out those who raised their hand the second time. For those who raised their hands the second time, seek out them folks you saw who raised their hand the first time. Part of the goal of all this for us is Robin Hood, but for all of us in the poverty fighting field is to make sure that at the end of the day, we have at least one or two new partnerships that we are going to use. At least one or two new people that we have learned something from, at least one or two people that we're now going to collaborate with, that we're going to take insights that's going to inform our work, and that we move in this space with a real sense of collaboration. And we know we're walking into today, and we want to leave today with a real sense of urgency of why this work matters and right now. When we're talking about a number like 50%, that's not them. That's us. This is us. This is the society that we have asked for and chosen. This is the society that we advocate for. So we must advocate for better and push for better. It's allowing all of us, it's asking all of us to think hard about the levers that we use, the issues that we push on, the voice that we have, and the urgency of getting it done now. I'm optimistic because when we look around this room and we look at the levers of influence, the levers of power, and the levels of honesty that we have in this room alone, there's no reason that we can't solve this. When we look at the people and the advocates and the voices that we have in this room alone right now, the experts that will both be on the stage later on, and also the experts that are sitting all amongst you right now, there's no way and no reason that we should tolerate or celebrate the fact that we're making progress. We have to move like it matters. If there was anything else that was impacting half of our population, you would see the population move like it matters. So there is no reason to have the reality of so many people who have to live under the trauma and pain of poverty and to not feel like that same level of urgency is not there. Every day you all are in the work. Every day we're fighting, we're advocating. Every day organizationally we're evolving, progressing, changing. And the possibility of now is that we will walk into not just this year, but we will walk into every single year with a focus on future generations and a focus on getting it right and getting it right permanently. That's our charge. That's our goal. That's our plan A, and there is no plan B. So we're thrilled about today. We're thrilled about your presence. We're thrilled about your partnership. We are humbled. We're grateful. And we're ready to get to work. Thank you all for being here today, and look forward to an amazing day. Bless you guys.